All right, welcome everyone to the Presence Church podcast. I'm your host, Mark Butler, and I'm once again joined by our pastors, Chris and Suzy Parks.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Long time no see. We've been hanging out all day
been a
today,
Yeah.
recording a lot of fun stuff for all of you, and we're rolling right into Save the Best for Last, the podcast, the three of us. And today we're talking about our series called Building What Matters. And we're talking through the book of Haggai. Is that even a book of the Bible? I don't know if any people have heard of that book.
But it's pronounced Haggai, not Haggai.
I'm trying to
end.
overemphasize the point that I'm making.
Yeah.
I actually know it's pronounced.
I think if you were Jewish, it would be something like Haggai, but in America it's just Haggai.
Haggai.
Yeah, I think you should not do that ever again.
Haggai.
We should. Abby, can you try to find how it's pronounced? That'd be fun. See if Chris is right.
Yeah.
Let's fact check the Jewish pronunciation.
I love it. Let's do it.
But yeah, Haggai, which is in the Old Testament.
That's right.
Yeah.
One of the minor prophets.
Can you give us a very high-level overview, Chris, of what Haggai is about?
Yeah. So there is a very sort of long history for the nation of Israel. So most people are very familiar with Genesis, where you have creation, and then you have a lot of history that builds to Noah. Eventually, you get to Abraham, and God makes Abraham all these promises. He'll be a great nation. Then there's several generations before the nation of Israel is sort of formed and ends up in captivity in Egypt. Then they leave Egypt, they wander around in the wilderness, and eventually move into the promised land. And you have the two great kings of Israel. It's really just one great king of Israel. So you have Saul, then David comes in as the greatest king Israel ever had. Then his son Solomon takes the throne after David dies. Solomon was known as the wisest man on earth. Yet in the end, he became an idolater, meaning he put other things before God. And he actually moved away from God toward the end of his life. And that resulted in a division of Israel. So Israel being made up of 12 tribes. 10 of those tribes moved to the north. 2 of the tribes moved to the south. Judah and Benjamin were the 2 in the south. And they were known as Judah, the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom, where the other 10 tribes were known as Israel in that day. Somewhere around 722 BC, the Assyrians come in and conquer the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes to the north. And it's something like 150 years later, they would then conquer Judah in the south. Now, what happened next was the Babylonians came in and conquered. Sorry, I got that wrong. It was the Assyrians conquered in the north, then the Babylonians conquered the Assyrians, then the Babylonians conquered Judah in the south. That's what it was. So what you have is God allowing these other nations to conquer his people because they had turned away from him for a prolonged period of time. And so God used these other nations to bring judgment and discipline and correction on his people, the Jews. Now, when the Babylonians take over, they eventually are defeated by the Persian Empire, who allowed the Jews to go home to Jerusalem. Now, it's important to note there were some divisions between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So the 10 tribes in the north, they believed you should worship in Samaria. The 2 tribes in the south believed you should worship in Jerusalem. So when King Darius of Persia said to the Jews, you can go home and rebuild your temple and rebuild your city in Jerusalem, back go something like 40,000 Jews. They return home to Jerusalem and they begin to rebuild the temple. But then because the Jews from the northern kingdom said, hey, we want to help you rebuild the city of Jerusalem, the Jews who were from Jerusalem said no thanks, because there was some ethnic division at that point because of that 150 years that they were conquered by the Assyrian Empire, then the Babylonians. There had been all this cross-cultural contamination happening from not just an ethnic standpoint, but a faith standpoint. They began worshiping other gods in combination with the Jewish God. And so the Jews in the South saw them as like pagans and half-breeds, and we don't want your worship to contaminate our worship. And so they said, hey, we're going to do this on our own. And we see a lot of this in the book of Ezra. It's kind of a partnering, same time frame as the book of Haggai. So the Samaritans to the north begin to create problems for the Jews in the south, and there's social pressure, there's political pressure. They're actually writing letters back to King Darius and trying to get the king of Persia to stop the work, which at one point he does. And so about 15 years after the Jews first went back to Jerusalem, God sends Haggai to talk to the people and say, hey, listen, you gave up building my house because of the political and the social pressure you faced, and instead you turned your attention toward building your own homes. And now your homes are great, but my house, the temple, is still in ruins. It's a mess. And so the prophet Haggai, he was pretty hard on the people in bringing this correction. And the prophet Zechariah is what's the term when you're a contemporary? He was a contemporary of Haggai, and he kind of like brought hope. He said all the encouraging things, and Haggai said all the hard things. And together with their message, God spurred the people on to rebuilding his temple. In fact, sort of our theme verse for this series is Haggai chapter 1, verse 14 says, so the Lord sparked the enthusiasm. He lists off some of the leaders there in Judah. And so God sparked the enthusiasm of the people and the enthusiasm of the whole remnant of God's people. They began to work on the house of the Lord their God, the Lord of heaven's armies. And so, what we see is God, through the prophet Haggai, reminding the people of the importance of putting God first in their life. God's not opposed to people having nice houses and living a good life and all, enjoying their wealth and the blessings that God brings them. What he asks of us is always to put him first. The order in our lives really matters. God first, everything else comes after that. And this is what the prophet Haggai writes about in just 3 short chapters, Is it 2? Oh, I'm sorry, it is 2 chapters. It was Habakkuk is 3 chapters, the other H prophet. So in these 2 chapters, it's really Haggai helping to spur people back to work in rebuilding the temple.
That's good. That was a great summary of a lot of the Old Testament.
Yeah,
too.
the meta-narrative of the Old Testament.
Yeah, so this is a post-exile period of time.
Yeah, and so like even if you think about, it's really fascinating to me. So much of my time and study of the Bible is trying to put myself in the shoes of the people I'm reading about. Because it's really easy for me to go like, yeah, whatever, they're going home. It's great, they're going home. But what are they going home from? They're going home from roughly 70 years in captivity, where now this is a generation returning home that was ripped out of their homes in Israel as a child. Some of them were even born in captivity. They don't even know what it means to live in their home country, in their home city of Jerusalem. And so these people are now going home to something that's foreign to them at this point. And there's an older generation that's like, it's so much better in Jerusalem. And I can hear the younger generation like, man, I have so much hope it's going to be better in Jerusalem. And then they get there. And as you read Ezra, Haggai, Zechariah, some of these other contemporaries of the time period, what you see as they return to a city that used to be glorious is an absolute ruin and rubble. And so I can imagine this younger generation going home to a new place that's supposed to be their home, and they're excited, and then they see the reality of what they're coming home to, and how overwhelming that must have been for them.
Yeah, that's good. Suzy, can you help us start to pull apart and piece together? Like Chris said, sometimes it's hard to like put ourselves in those shoes. So I guess why are we talking about Haggai? Like, why are we talking about Haggai? What does it have to do with our series kind of and our world today? What are some of the similarities that we see in that post-exile Israel that we see in different ways, but we see some similarities in our society and our culture today?
I got the easy question. You get the
Yeah,
hard
what
question.
the
But your
heck?
answer was from a very simple question. You had quite a robust.
It's almost like I've
answer.
studied it recently.
And while Suzy, I'm giving Suzy a little bit of time because I also skipped this part in the beginning. But if you're looking for more information, if you're looking for more resources on discipleship, if you're looking for the message or a daily reading plan, you can find all of that on our website. You can go to presencesj.org. We have a resource section, and you can find everything you're looking for there. And yeah, make sure you go and check that out. And now I've bought Suzy an extra 20 or 30 seconds. I can also have Chris step in to answer part of it.
Let me jump in and
'Cause
share.
I know you wrote more of this message.
Yeah. So, when we're thinking about us as a brand new church, right? We launched in September of 2025. And so as of the time of this series, we're just a few months old. And thinking about what God wants to do in our community, and we as a church, as a leadership team, there's a group of us that lead this church together, and we have big dreams for what God wants this church to become, and not for the sake of like Presence Church being a mega church or being known across the world, but for the sake of our neighbors living to their fullest potential in life, this rich and satisfying life that Jesus has called us to. And so there's an invitation here. Now, for the children of Israel in the book of Haggai, what we read, in particular from Haggai, as I said, Zechariah was more on the positive side, but Haggai deals very directly with what they were facing. Their lives were focused on something important. They were focused on building their own lives, which is something God wants us to do. He wants us to build our own lives. But the thing they were missing is they were putting their own lives before their relationship with God. And if there's one thing we want God to do in our church, it's to help us put Him first, because then everything else in our lives makes sense.
Yeah, and I think for us, even the whole series around building what matters, so often in where we live, the context in which we are in, is building a life that matters. What does that look like? And when you think of the houses that we want to acquire, the cars that we drive, like what does it look like to have this life that matters? And do we want it to matter to people, or do we want it to matter to God? And in the context of church, we sometimes look at churches and from the outside looking in, they have it all together. And same with families, and from the outside looking in, it's a pristine house and it's looks perfect, but inside that's falling apart. And the church can be the same way. And we want to build what matters, that's lasting for eternity. That is not something that we're just building for today. We want to build something for tomorrow and for the next generation. And that means building communities that are vulnerable and authentic, and really use our lives to make a difference in our neighborhoods, in our city. And that stems from our church community making a difference.
Yeah, and there's an intentionality behind it, right? Like choosing to place God first in our lives means that we live differently. And I think as you read through Haggai, what you see is the nation of Israel. They turned around and they changed the way they chose to live their lives to focus in their attention on putting God first. And when we do that, it aligns us in our marriages, with our kids, with our families. It aligns our career. And everything begins to fall into the correct order in our lives. So I think the principle at work isn't that God doesn't want us to build our own lives. It's that He wants us to focus our attention on Him first.
Yeah, that's good. What do you guys think are some like litmus tests or some ways that we can check if we are chasing or caring about things that do matter? Because I think even the people in the book of Haggai, like for a lot of people, they are doing what they think is the most important.
Sure.
So how do I know if I'm moving in the right direction, if I'm prioritizing the things that God prioritizes, or if I'm kind of getting sucked into culture that says that is the most important thing? Because that especially, I'm in culture in general, I think especially in Silicon Valley, where it's like, no, you're like, you need to like take care of your family. Again, a great thing, right? Like you need to take care of your family, which involves making more money so that you can, I think you said, buy the house, and again, all good things. But how do you know if you're leaning too much to what the world calls the most important thing versus what God says is like, I'm aligned with God versus I'm aligned with what culture says is most important? Because it's very subtle. And I think it's easy to find yourself, you wake up one day a lot of the times, right? Most people don't choose, like, I'm choosing to do the thing that isn't as important. That's not how most people find themselves in a position where they're maybe not, where they need to be called out, or God would maybe disagree with their priorities.
Yeah. For me, I think it's multi-layered, right? Discerning the voice of God, discerning what he's asking us to pursue and what he's not asking us. Is it out of a selfish ambition, or is it out of, some people are very good at making money, at their craft, at their career, and they can use that in such generous, beautiful ways for the kingdom. Where we get into trouble is where we isolate ourselves from the mission, and we don't ask God to ask him what is his opinion, or ask him, is this what you want to bless? We ask him to bless what we want him to bless. And so inviting him into the conversation is the first thing I would say. But then also having a community of people that can help you to discern. That might be a spouse, it might be a friend, it might be several friends, and that are also kingdom minded, to say, hey, I'm really struggling with, I don't know if this is my best yes with my finances. Is this my best yes with my career, my kids' education, whatever it is, having that collective discernment. And then the biggest thing that I think people miss is peace. If you don't have peace about the decision, wait and wait some more, and then wait some more. Because even if there's a decision that maybe I'm disappointed, but I know if I'm disobedient, I just don't have that peace. And so sometimes I might not in the moment agree with God in what this should look like, but I always have peace when I know that he's asking me to do it. And even if it's not what I was thinking the decision was going to be.
Yeah, I think about this litmus test thing as being at a high level, 2 apps on my phone. One is my calendar and one is my banking app. And if I look at my calendar and I don't see Jesus anywhere in my calendar, that's a problem. It's an indicator. And when I look at my spending in the month and I don't see anything related to Jesus, that's an indicator, right? That's a problem. So what does that look like? Well, let me say what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like 99% of your paycheck going to the church. That's not what I'm talking about. It doesn't even look like 99% of your time going to the church or to Jesus. I'm not talking about doing everything at church all the time, or what we're talking about is living according to God's principles, which is to say financially, we're a church that believes in the tithe, that we give 10% of what God gives us goes immediately back to him through whatever church you call home, whatever spiritual community ministers to you is where that should go. And then there's opportunities to give above and beyond that as well, as the Lord leads you to do that. And then with the calendar, maybe it looks like that 15 minutes, there's a block that goes in your calendar every morning before you get ready for work, that you drink a cup of coffee and you talk to Jesus for 15 minutes. You read a psalm or two, a passage of scripture. And then that you make the effort to invest in community building. Suzy talked about this a lot. The need for community, the need to go to church. Church should be a priority in our lives. And statistically speaking, in America, if you go to church 1.4 times a month, you're considered a regular church attender. And, I'm going to just say the bold, plain thing. That's not good enough. And it's not because like the pastor needs you to show up at church so we can count numbers and it looks like our church is growing. It's because real spiritual community is developed with consistency, right? Small, consistent investments over a long period of time bring great fruit. And so for us to experience that kind of deep and abiding relationship with Jesus, we have to do it in the context of community. But if you only talk to your spouse or your child 1.4 times a month, right? If you only went on a date with your wife 1.4 times a month, you're going to be pretty unhappy in your marriage. And the same is true in our relationship with God. We have to make the intentional time investments to grow close to him so we can do some of the things Suzy talked about, right? Praying and discerning the voice of God and experiencing peace and decision making. If we're not close to God, we're not going to be able to do those things.
Yeah, that's good. I want to shift gears a little bit into what we will have or are going to. I think we are going to talk about in week 2 by the time this gets released, which is when you talked about attending church. I know that's one shift in our culture is the motives for attending church and whether that is cool, whether that is something that you can do culturally and that can benefit you if you attend church. I think we're seeing a shift where that is not really true anymore, where cultural Christianity of the past is more or less gone. Can you guys talk through a little bit more on just like what that looks like, why that's maybe even good in some ways, and how does that align, again, going back to Haggai, if there's any ties there, or how it ties into our series as a whole.
Yeah, I think we should define cultural Christianity a little bit, at least for the purposes of our conversation. This could be one of those things you might find nuanced definitions outside of this one, but for the purposes of our conversation, I think of cultural Christianity as you run into somebody at the gas station and the conversation turns to religion and they go, oh yeah, my parents went to church when I was a kid, so I guess I'm Christian. Right. This idea of just assuming because we live in America, we're a Christian, or because my parents or my family context was going to church, on Christmas and Easter.
Yeah.
I'm a Christian.
It's almost like a hashtag, like you can throw it on whatever you want. And
it's
now linked. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, where we are in the San Francisco Bay Area in Silicon Valley, we have such a diverse mix of ethnicities and heritage and background. People come from all over the world to work in technology here. And so we really are sort of back to the founding days of America. This is a melting pot, region. And so that's part of why we live in such a post-Christian environment, because we have many that have come from other nations and other faith backgrounds. They have no Christian context at all. They grew up in Muslim countries or Hindu countries, Buddhist countries. And so they come here having not really been around Christians and not knowing Christian sort of ways of living. And zero judgment of that. I think it's great that we can sort of call that out, recognize it, because it, from a strategic standpoint, changes some of our approaches to ministry and caring for people. It helps us understand how to care for people in a way that matters to them, right? As followers of Jesus, we're called to be all things to all people that we might win some. Those are the words of the Apostle Paul. And so for us to be able to identify where our culture is today, being different than maybe what our parents grew up with, is very helpful. So this idea of cultural Christianity dying is like, it's like water to a dry and thirsty soul to me, because it's people get tricked into believing they're Christians when they have no relationship with God because of cultural Christianity. In fact, I don't remember who it was, but we talked to a church planter from like Alabama, and I said something to him to the effect of, it must be so easy to plant a church in the South here in the Bible Belt. And he said, yes and no. He said, where you live, you just need to convince people they need Jesus. Where I live, I have to start by convincing them they don't have Jesus, and then I have to convince them that they need Jesus. That is the nature of cultural Christianity. People just think they have a relationship with God, even when they've not made an intentional choice to give their lives to Jesus.
Because it's like through osmosis, where it's like, oh, well, yeah, for generations, we've believed in God. For generations, this is just what we do. We go to church on Christmas and Easter, and we believe in God. We believe there is a God, but we are not pursuing a relationship with Him. We're not actively having conversations with Him. We're not praying. We're not experiencing the fullness of God, and we don't even know what that is. And there's so much richness, and our heart is for people to discover the living God, to discover the power of the Holy Spirit, and what happens when a praying community gets on their knees and seeks the Lord and encounters His presence.
Yeah, and I think, it'll sound like a harsh way to say it, but I don't know how else to say it. Cultural Christianity is all the worst parts of hypocrisy. And it's not because people intend to do it. It's because they just don't know, right? They don't understand the nuanced difference between being a cultural Christian and actually following Jesus. Mm-hmm. So it's easy for that to be confusing for people. I totally understand it. And so that's why I think it's good that it's going away, because it's removing that layer of confusion. And what we're seeing, particularly in Gen Z, and in particular with Gen Z males, they're returning to faith at a higher rate than females. This is the first time, according to the data, that we're seeing that. It could be ever in the history of these statistics that men are coming to church at a higher rate than women are. And so much of what this generation wants, Gen Z and younger millennials, is authenticity, a real experience. And so cultural Christianity really doesn't provide that real authentic experience. It's covered under layers of misunderstanding.
Yeah, and I think under that authenticity and being able to trust too, like what's the concept I'm thinking about, which is kind of tangent, is like, oh, did you hear that like Bieber is a Christian, like he's a born again believer, right? Like I think we get caught up in that. And I it's not exactly cultural Christianity because it's obviously not defining myself, but it changes the way that we see people in popular culture just because we heard or they said. And again, I think you're looking for that authenticity, and that comes down to what you do for yourself in that personal relationship with Jesus. Just thinking about Michaela was talking to a relative, and they were saying something about a particular news organization. They're like, yeah, it's awesome, like they have some born again believers there. And Michaela and I were just talking like, yeah, but like how much weight can you put on a fact when it's thrown out like that, because it's meant to drive credibility. But without any personal relationship with that person, it can be misleading in some ways the hashtag I'm a Christian, I think used to carry a lot of weight. And I think in a lot of good ways, the veil's kind of starting to be ripped off, and the authentic experience is being more valued than what labels people put on themselves or on each other. Yeah.
And I mean, all this makes me think of the general distrust millennials and Gen Z have for institutions. Now, Gen X, which is our generation, we
Ours as in Chris and mine, not Mark's.
Yeah, not Mark. I think Mark is Gen Alpha.
Oh,
no,
that's
no,
rude.
no.
That's rude.
Are you right at the tail end of
That's
millennials?
uncalled for.
Are you a millennial or are you an early Gen Z?
I think
I
he's
think I'm
Gen
right in the
Z.
middle. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like on the shoulder of both.
Yeah.
I think millennial, but yeah, it's like
Right
again,
on the
a weird,
cusp.
weird shoulder right in between. the
Yeah.
two.
You do get washed between generations,
Yeah.
based on when you're born within that generation. But Gen X essentially just said like, screw it, we're gonna just do our own thing, and kind of that was our rebellion. Millennials were like, hey, let's all just kind of have our own experience. You ever talk to somebody and they're like, well, my truth is. Right, that's a very millennial thing.
Well, I mean, Y2K was going to happen, and none of us were going to be here. So,
Yeah, Mark, that
Do
was
you.
Mark. That was
Y2K
Do
scene?
you?
No.
that was before Mark was born.
It was right after I was born.
right?
And and now sort of as each generation responds to society and institutions, what you find is the reactions to those things differ from one generation to the next. And so where millennials are like, hey, everybody just kind of like do what makes you happy and find your truth and do your thing. Gen Z is like, no, we want the real thing.
Yeah.
What's
'Cause
the
they're
real
experiencing
thing?
the fallout, I think,
Yeah.
of what does it look like if everyone does their own thing.
Right.
I think they're seeing that there is like, yeah, I would like that to be true, but I'm seeing some ways are better than others in the results
Totally.
of
Yeah, and
I
people's
think-
lives and society.
Yeah, I think like Chris was talking about the mistrust of institutions, the mistrust like politically, the mistrust of churches, like mega churches and the fallen churches. And so all of that, like they're no longer going in skeptical, like they're going in like, I will find the truth. Like I'm only about the truth. And if you are in any way trying to put on a show, if you are any way trying to disguise anything about what you're bringing to me, I don't want any part of it. And they want the truth. They want to be who they are, and they want to make a difference. They want justice for everyone. And so I think we're living in a really beautiful time because that's who God created us to be uniquely designed for his purpose, but uniquely, all of us are uniquely created. And in order to be one of his followers, you just need to be you exactly as you are. He's not looking for the imposter. He's not looking for someone that has it all together. He is looking for you.
Yeah, Suzy and I have been at this following Jesus thing for 3 decades now at this point in our lives. And, some stats I looked at were actually average age for church planters. But I do, based on my experience, anecdotally, that feels like that age is moving to the younger side. Like more younger people are planting churches. And I don't think that we could have planted a church 20 years ago for a lot of reasons, but as it relates to this conversation, we have always sort of been very authentic people. Like you just, something I've always tried to live my life. Yeah, I've always wanted to just be the same guy in every room I go into, as best I can. All of us morph a little bit, and it's appropriate within certain limits and things. But I don't know that the world was ready for the type of church Jesus is building at Presence Church when we were in our 20s.
Yeah.
Because culture was different, and what culture required from the church at that time was more of the
Pedicured.
Have it all together.
yeah. And so I think that's part of God's beautiful timing. Mm-hmm. I think that God lived out his beautiful timing in what we read in the book of Haggai. And he gave his people a mission to go back and rebuild the city. Really, they started with the temple, rebuilding the temple, the house of God, and the people got a little distracted. They faced some opposition, and so they were ordered by their conquering king to stop the work. And so then you're trying to balance again, trying to put ourselves in their shoes and what they faced. And I think as we do that, we see some ties between our modern culture and what they were dealing with in the book of Haggai for those 15 or so years where they had to stop building. They saw their mission come to a halt. They weren't sure what to do. So they did honestly what the disciples did when Jesus was crucified. They went back to fishing, right? We all have our default that we go back to. And so they did that, but God sent the prophets to say, hey, remember the mission. This is about rebuilding my house first, not building your own house first. And we spend a lot of our time and energy in life building our own brand, right? I mean, all you got to do is flip through Instagram or TikTok, or depending on what generation you're in, Facebook. There's probably still some MySpace users out there, although they're probably not listening to this podcast. But we spend a lot of time and energy building our own brand and focused on our platform, focused on our comfort, focused on the things that are going to make our lives better and more comfortable and make our kids happy and all of that. And those things are not necessarily bad things, but they become bad things when we do those at the cost of what God has called us to do. And that's really the crux of this whole teaching series, Building What Matters. It's how do we focus in our energy on what God has called us to do? Because when we live generously, when we give generously of our time, our talents, and our treasure, God's going to do infinitely more than we could ask or think. That's what Ephesians 3:20 says. God's going to do infinitely more than we can ask or think, but we do have our part to play in that mission.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a pretty eloquent summary of our topics and our series.
Did Mark just call me
of
eloquent?
Our time together today.
That's the nicest thing
eloquent
anybody
moments.
said to me.
Yeah.
Oh, now it's only moments.
I don't know if anyone's described you as eloquent. I don't know if that's accurate.
Well, we keep it real around here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. But yeah, thank you guys for that great conversation about our series, Building What Matters. I hope that everyone listening enjoyed the conversation. And once again, if you're looking for more, make sure you go to our website at presencesj.org, and we will see you all next month for our next series on authentic.